You know that moment when you're knee-deep in debugging some really complex system, or maybe you're wrestling with a prompt trying to get the AI to do exactly what you want.
Oh, yeah. That feeling of just wanting to peek under the hood.
Exactly. And you just wish you could see the actual thought process behind it all. Well, that's pretty much what we're digging into today.
Hmm.
Welcome to the deep dive. We take these big, complex topics and, well, we try to pull out the insights that matter for you.
And today, that topic is meta-artificial communication in multi-agent AI systems. It sounds a bit technical,
It
maybe?
does sound like a mouthful.
Yeah, but basically it's about AI agents sort of talking about how they're working, how they're collaborating.
Right. So not just doing the work, but communicating about the work.
Precisely. And we've got some really fascinating sources that look at this AI, explaining their reasoning, where they're running into trouble, their strategies for working together.
And for you listening, especially if you're working with complex software or, crafting sophisticated prompts, understanding this could genuinely offer some powerful new ways to think about building and troubleshooting your own systems.
Absolutely. It's about parallels, finding insights, and how these AIs are designed to collaborate and be transparent.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. Let's break down this idea of AI talking about thinking. We want to pull out the core concepts, the things that might actually be useful, maybe spark some ideas for your work in system software or prompt engineering.
Yeah, let's get into the nuts and bolts. We're not just describing it, we want to explore how the ideas could apply.
Great. So let's kick things off. What exactly is meta-artificial communication? Like, in simple terms.
Okay, so at its heart, it's about AI agents making their internal workings, their processes, transparent.
Transparent, okay.
Yeah, it's more than just sending data back and forth. It involves them, explicitly explaining why they made a decision or the logic they followed or how they're coordinating with other AI agents, all happening in real time.
Huh. Okay, so let me try and picture this. Instead of, say, my microservices just passing data blobs, they'd also maybe pass a note saying, I chose this data structure because, or handling a potential race condition this way because.
Exactly like that. Imagine debugging a distributed system with that kind of built-in explanation. It could be huge for finding the root cause of problems.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like having this superpower diagnostic log that tells you the why, not just the what.
Right. And one really interesting mechanism these AI systems use to do this talking about thinking is something called placebo pipes.
Placebo pipes. Okay, the name alone makes me curious. What on earth are those?
Aha. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good name.
Yeah.
So imagine a kind of placeholder. Our sources mention symbols like a question mark in brackets or dots or just pipe.
Okay, a placeholder.
An AI agent puts this placeholder in when it hits a piece of information it needs or a dependency that hasn't been resolved yet. And the clever part, as the sources point out, is they have this dual purpose.
Okay, dual purpose. I can guess the first one. It's like putting a sticky note in the code saying, need user auth token here, right? It flags something missing.
You got it. That's the first part, clearly flagging a dependency. One source even mentions a scenario where it might involve waiting for input from a human engineer, this guy Dennis.
Right, so the AI could literally signal, hey, human, need your input here before I can finish this bit.
Exactly. But the second purpose is also key. These placebo pipes let the AI keep working on the other parts of the task, the parts that aren't blocked by that missing piece.
Okay, so the whole system doesn't just grind to a halt because one piece of data is missing.
Hmm.
It acknowledges the gap, flags it, but keeps the assembly line moving where possible.
Precisely. It maintains the workflow continuity.
That's actually a really smart way to handle dependencies. It reminds me a bit of how, in software development, we might use mocks or stubs. We build around the missing piece while we wait for it.
It's a very similar principle, yeah.
One of the sources mentioned an example about extracting a role and task plan. How would placebo pipes fit in there? What can, someone listening take away for handling their own situations with incomplete info?
Good question. So the example talks about being able to extract a role and task plan from any given starting point directly without changing it. Now, maybe there's uncertainty about what counts as a valid starting point.
Okay, like some ambiguity in the initial request.
Right. Instead of getting stuck defining that perfect starting point up front, the system could use a placebo pipe, maybe representing that uncertainty. It then proceeds to outline the roles and tasks based on the assumed start point, but with that pipe flagging the assumption.
And then it can circle back later to resolve that uncertainty, maybe ask for clarification or use some other process.
Exactly. For a system software developer, this suggests a way to build more resilient systems, systems that can keep going, even with some ambiguity rather than just crashing. But crucially, you need to clearly mark and manage those unresolved bits, those pipes.
That's a great takeaway. Build the scaffolding, flag the gaps explicitly.
Oh.
Okay, so moving on. The sources also talk about structured collaboration and dynamic roles in these AI systems. How does this meta communication, this talking about thinking, enable that?
Well, one source really emphasizes breaking tasks down, step-by-step processes, clear end goals, always aiming for that complete solution in the end.
Right, structured approach.
And there's this mention of a YAML file example showing the Meta AI team collaboration. It's described as a narrative artifact. That's key.
A narrative artifact, meaning?
It's not just the final output or even just the code. It's a documented story of how the collaboration happened, who did what, why roles shifted, what decisions were made. This detailed log, the meta communication itself, is what allows for understanding how the team worked.
Ah, I see. So you get this transparent record of the journey, not just the destination. That sounds incredibly valuable for understanding complex interactions or, yeah, doing postmortems if something goes wrong.
Exactly right. And talking about roles, the sources point out they can shift fluidly. You might have one AI, say Fizz, handling the language processing, then another, the deliverable integrator, stepping in if there's a conflict to resolve.
Okay, dynamic roles based on need.
Yes, but, and this is important, as confirmed in one of the dialogues mentioned, these shifts aren't random. They happen according to the initial rules, the parameters the system was given, and the ongoing meta communication between the agents. They agree on the shift, essentially.
That really mirrors agile teams, doesn't it? Where people with specific skills jump in when needed. But the big difference here is the AI agents are explicitly talking about these shifts and why they're happening. How could thinking about that, about AI dynamically assigning roles and communicating it, maybe inform how we design our own software? More modular, more adaptable systems.
Well, it certainly raises questions. Could we design software components that are more flexible, that can dynamically take on different responsibilities based on the immediate context or the type of request coming in?
Interesting.
But the transparency aspect is crucial. For that kind of dynamic system to work and be, maintainable, you'd need really clear internal communication about why roles are shifting. It points towards needing that meta communication layer within the software itself. Could lead to more robust architectures.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, shifting gears slightly, one of the sources gets into the wider implications of this kind of transparent AI thinking. How does this talking about thinking connect to bigger ideas like trust and accountability?
That's a really critical connection, isn't it? If an AI system can actually articulate why it did something using this meta communication, well, that naturally builds trust.
Yeah, as a developer, if I can follow the logic trail, I'm much more likely to trust the output, especially for important stuff.
Right. And accountability becomes much clearer, too. If there's an error, having that detailed reasoning trail makes tracing the problem back to its source so much easier. That's fundamental for good debugging, for improvement. It's about cracking open the black box.
Definitely moving away from the black box.
Yeah.
And does this push towards transparency influence the actual tech choices we might make?
It could, yeah. The source suggests that if we really prioritize understanding how an AI gets to an answer, we might favor models that are naturally more interpretable. Think decision trees versus, say, a very complex, opaque neural network.
So potentially trading off a tiny bit of raw predictive power for the ability to actually understand what's going on inside.
Exactly. There's that trade-off. Of course, the source also brings up a really important point, security. If you make the inner workings transparent, you might also be exposing algorithms or logic that could be exploited.
Ah, good point. So transparency needs safeguards. You open the hood, you need to make sure no one can tamper with the engine easily.
Precisely. Need robust protections.
What about the user side of things? How does metacommunication change how people might interact with these more transparent AIs?
Well, there's exciting potential for better feedback loops. If you, as a user, can see why the AI produced a certain output, you can give much more specific, much more useful feedback.
Right. Instead of just saying, that's wrong, you could say, I see you based this on X, but you should have considered Y.
Exactly. It becomes more collaborative. You're essentially helping refine the AI's process. It's like iterative development or like how you refine prompts to get better results. You understand the why so you can tweak the how.
Makes sense.
But there's a caveat mentioned. The literacy gap.
Literacy gap.
Yeah. Just because the AI's internal logic is technically laid bare doesn't mean everyone can easily understand it. Technical transparency isn't the same as accessible explanation.
That's a huge point. We need to think about how to communicate that internal logic effectively, maybe translating it for different audiences,
Mm.
not just dumping a log file.
Couldn't agree more. It's a communication challenge as much as a technical one.
Now, there's another source called Talking About Thinking, which sounds like it brings in the human angle. How does our own experience of, well, talking about our thinking relate to this AI metacommunication?
It's a great parallel. That source reminds us that articulating our own internal thoughts, our reasoning, is really fundamental to how we collaborate as humans, how we build self-awareness, how we innovate.
Right, we explain things to each other, we teach, we justify decisions.
Exactly. And meta-artificial communication is, in many ways, an attempt to engineer that same crucial capability into AI. The source touches on perspectives from philosophy, psychology, all wrestling with how complex it is for even us to make our internal states clear.
So we're trying to build something in AI that's deeply human, something we know is incredibly valuable, but also kind of hard, even for us.
Yeah. And that brings up the idea of articulation barriers.
Articulation barriers,
I
like
mean,
writer's block, but for thoughts.
sort of. Just like we sometimes struggle to find the right words, or some thoughts are more like feelings or intuitions that are hard to verbalize, we should probably expect AI systems to have limits too.
Okay. So even with metacommunication, an AI might not be able to perfectly capture or explain everything about its internal state or reasoning.
That seems likely. It suggests that while we should push for more transparency, we need to be realistic. A complete, perfect window into the AI mind might not be fully achievable, just like it isn't for humans.
That's a really useful perspective, keeps things grounded. Okay, quick question about Kicklang. It's mentioned in one of the documents. What's its role here?
Ah, Kickling. So the description positions it as a formal language used by the research assistant system. Its job is basically translating natural language queries like what a user asks into a structured format
Structured format for what?
for interacting with the system's knowledge graph. The source uses this interesting phrase, calling the knowledge graph a cognitive computational linguistic transport transform.
Okay, that's evocative.
It is. But basically, Kicklang seems to be the precise, unambiguous language the system uses internally to represent and manipulate information from the knowledge graph based on the user's request.
So it's like the system's internal machine code for dealing with knowledge and requests, ensuring clarity. Does it explicitly say the AIs use Kicklang to talk to each other in their metacommunication?
The sources don't state that directly, no, but given the overall emphasis on structured, clear communication for collaboration and reasoning,
It makes sense they'd use something formal and precise for their internal dialogues, right? To avoid misunderstandings when they're discussing complex steps or decisions.
exactly. Whether it's Kicklang itself or just principles of formal, structured language, it seems likely that precision would be key for effective meta-artificial communication between agents.
Okay, good clarification. So finally, let's loop back to that idea of meta AI being a cohesive collective with dynamic capabilities. It feels like meta communication is the glue holding that collective together.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. Meta-artificial communication is the thread, the essential ingredient, that allows these individual AI agents to function as a single coordinated problem-solving unit.
It's how they coordinate, how they leverage each other's specialized skills, how they adapt on the fly.
Yep. The division of labor, the roles shifting based on expertise, handling complex tasks, it all relies on them being able to transparently communicate about their status, their reasoning, their part in the bigger picture. It's the talking about thinking that makes the sophisticated collaboration possible.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the big picture is meta-artificial communication is about AI agents being open about their internal processes, especially during collaboration. We saw things like placebo pipes as a neat trick for handling dependencies while keeping work flowing. And the dynamic roles show potential for very flexible systems. And for you listening, the relevance seems clear. Thinking about these concepts, transparency, explicit communication about process, managing dependencies openly, dynamic roles could offer really fresh perspectives. Perspectives on how you design more understandable, more robust software, how you debug complex systems, or even how you approach prompt engineering to better understand and guide AI behavior.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a pretty interesting thought, doesn't it? Considering how these AI systems are being designed to explicitly talk about thinking, what does that suggest for us?
You mean for how we communicate?
Yeah.
As developers, as prompt engineers?
Yeah. How do we talk about the internal workings of the systems we build or interact with? Could we maybe adopt some of these meta communication strategies, more explicit process talk, clear dependency flagging in our own teams and our own documentation to improve how we work and understand these complex systems?
That's a fascinating question to ponder. Could we make our own thinking about systems more transparent to each other? Definitely something to chew on.
It is. We really encourage you to uh, dig into the sources yourself if this sparked your interest. There's a lot more detail there, and you can really think about how these principles might map onto the specific challenges you face in your work.